thankful that you're here. Galatians chapter 5 is where we're at. Galatians chapter 5. And let me get over there. I'm going to find some. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to prepare me a sermon after that. Galatians chapter 5. Stand with me if you would, out of respect for the Word of God. We're going to begin reading. In verse number 13. Going to begin reading in verse number 13. The Bible says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not your liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another." I wish I had time. I'm going to take time one of these nights to explain to you the concept, the actual true doctrine of what is called Christian liberty, because it is sorely misunderstood and it is sorely abused by those who would do so. But I'm not going to cover that tonight. Verse 14, "For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed, ye be not consumed one of another. This I say unto you, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these two are contrary the one to the other, so that they cannot do the things that ye would." Father, I pray you'd bless the reading of your word. Teach us tonight about treating one another. And use the service tonight to the edification of your church. And I pray these things in thy name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. Verse number 16, as I said, is often quoted out of context. Walk in the Spirit. You'll not fulfill the lust of the flesh. But if you put it into context and you look at what he's admonishing the church about, he's admonishing them about their attitude and actions toward one another. He says the law is fulfilled in one word, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed lest you be consumed one of another. I was explaining to my son the story of the little phrase that's written in the front, or printed in the front of this one, in every Bible that I own. From the time I've been in, all the way back when I was in college, I started doing this. I took my Bible and I wrote this phrase in the front of my Bible. And it's in Spanish. It says, "No se olvide el Pastor Vasquez." That means never forget Pastor Vasquez. Pastor Vasquez was a Guatemalan national. He was a Roman Catholic, and he was led to Christ by Frank Martin, who was a missionary in Guatemala. Wonderful man, Brother Frank Martin, great missionary, spent his life on the field there. But they suffered great persecution. And he was a convert of Brother Martin's, and he became a pastor, and he was pastoring a church, and the church was booming and growing, but they were also suffering great persecution. At one point, the group of Catholics dragged him out in the street and beat him and doused him with gasoline and tried to set him on fire. It was only the grace of God that didn't happen. Folks, you got to understand, let me chase the rabbit down. You got to understand something. The Roman Catholic Church isn't what it looks like in America. The Roman Catholic Church has a long history of killing people that they disagree with. If you think that's changed, check with some of our South American missionaries down in Mexico and Guatemala and Peru, and that have to deal with some of that. you will find out that that's still the case a lot of times. They left him alone after a while. They left Brother Vasquez alone. And Brother Vasquez was sitting at the table with the missionary at the breakfast table one morning, and he said, "Missionary," he's talking to Brother Martin, "Missionary, you know, the church has grown a lot, and we're blessed." He said, "We're not being persecuted the way we were once before." He said, "We're not being persecuted, but we don't have the fire in our hearts anymore." He said, "I wish, get this, I wish the persecution would come back so that we would once again have that fire in our hearts." And I thought, brother, that's a mature Christian right there. A guy who would choose, I'd rather be on fire for God under persecution than have no persecution and be a lame Christian. Can I tell you that one of the things that while they were under persecution, they didn't face a lot of division in the church. You see, persecution from the outside will not destroy the church. Division from the inside will. Quicker than anything. Like I said, it's interesting to me that with everything that was wrong with the church at Corinth, and there was they were out of bounds on everything. I mean, they were off base. They were doing everything wrong. And Paul corrected them. And I find it interesting that the very first thing that Paul, with all of the things that are wrong, the thing that Paul led with, the very first thing that he dealt with, he said, "I hear there are divisions among you." Isn't it interesting that that's the one he chose? Isn't that interesting that that's the one he chose? Because it's the division, it's not the persecution outside the church that will destroy a church. It's the division inside the church that will destroy it. By the way, that's true about a company. That's true about a business. That's true about a nation. A house divided, Jesus said it, and a house divided cannot long stand. Our nation today is a house divided. We're not a nation of groups of people that are trying to get to the same place. We just have a different way of looking at getting to that same place. That's not where we are today. Where we are today is we have basically two factions of people that want to go in completely different directions. And it's sad. I fear for the future of our country. That kind of division will destroy a church. That's why Paul is addressing here. He said, if you bite and devour one another, you will be consumed of one another. It will destroy you. That's when he says, walk in the Spirit, that you not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That division is always caused by lust. The Bible says, only by pride cometh what? Contention. Only by pride cometh contention. Proud. I just won't give in. I'd rather die than give in. I'd rather fight than switch. You know, I'd rather destroy this thing than have it. I'd rather destroy this thing and than not get my way. I resigned from a church because of that. Not because of the division, but to keep from causing the division. The church, we had a big mess there in Kansas City, and it was a big old church, and the church was divided on it. And it all revolved around me, and I resigned the church, not because they voted me out, because they voted me in. They voted, it did come down to a vote, and they voted, yeah, we're going to keep him. And it was 90%. But I didn't want the church to live with a cloud over its head about that division. And I didn't want that division to sit there and fester and stew and cause problems. And I thought, no, I know you voted me in, but I know that there's still a lot going on here, and you need another pastor to come in here and fix it. A very wise man said to me, he said, brother, you're a good preacher, you're a great pastor. You need to be pastoring a church, but not this one. That was one of my faithful men. You need to be pastoring a church, but not this one. And he was right, and he was wise, and we did the right thing. That church is doing okay now. Church is doing okay. And by the way, after I left, God did some purging. That's another story. But a spiritual church is a church that's not divided. And they're not divided because of how they treat one another. And I want to speak to you about how we treat one another. Last week, I covered forgiving one another. The challenge, number one, forgiving others. Secondly, forgiving yourself. And forgiving God. When God doesn't live up to our expectations. And we do have expectations of how God is supposed to do things. Well, that just didn't work. I thought God would handle that differently. Well, God didn't confer with me about how to handle it. A man told his wife, he said, you can tell me what you want done, or you can tell me how to do it, but you can't tell me both. You want it done? I'll do it, but you're not going to tell me how to do it. All right? And truthfully, it all boils down in forgiveness. It all boils down to me deciding to let go of that thing that I'm holding on to. Because I'll tell you this, it doesn't damage me if you don't forgive me. The person you're not forgiving, they go on their merry way. You're the one that suffers the damage. We talked about forgiving one another. I want to talk about a few more here tonight, and these won't take a whole sermon each. Forgiveness, I felt like, warranted a sermon to stand on its own. But how do you have a spiritual church? Well, it boils down to how you treat one another. How do you have unity in the church? Well, it boils down to how you treat one another. Number one, we talked about forgiving one another. Number two, let me read the passage to you. Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 2. Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 2. With all lowliness and meekness and with long suffering. That's an interesting word in the Bible, long suffering. Forbearing one another in love. Number one, forgiving one another. Number two, forbearing one another. You know what that means? Quite simply, that means putting up with one another. To forbear one another means, you know what? You're part of my church. You have faults, you have frailties, you might have things that get on my nerves, but that's okay. I'm just going to work around that and love you anyway. Now, I'm not thinking about anybody in particular in this church. I get along with everybody great, and nobody really bothers me. No, seriously. If you were to ask me, is there one member, first off, if you were to ask me this, I wouldn't answer the question. But in the pulpit, I will answer honestly. Is there any church member that just gets on your nerves? Can I tell you honestly, no, there's not. Now, if I were pastoring in Kansas City again, I could tell you there's some people there that got on my nerves. You know what? I learned something from them. You know what you do to a diamond to make it valuable? You cut it. You cut it. There used to be a commercial on television way back in the 70s. They were advertising the smooth ride of the Lincoln Continental. And they set up a guy, and he had this little laptop thing in his back seat of this Lincoln, and he's riding along. He's a master jeweler. And he takes a diamond, and while they're driving along, he takes his little chisel, he puts the diamond in a vise, and he hits it just right and splits it in a perfect angle while this car is going down the road. You know, when he holds up the diamond, he goes, perfect, you know. But I don't know if it was or not. I don't know how real that commercial was, but I know this about diamonds. You can take a diamond, and a jeweler can take a diamond, and he can cut that diamond in a certain way. He can cut that diamond, and if he cuts it right, he can double the value. If he cuts it wrong, it's worthless. You know how you make a diamond? You cut and you shear and you shave, and that's a violent act. It really is a violent act. Because you have to use a chisel, a special chisel that's hard enough to cut diamonds with. And it slices and it cuts stuff off. Do you realize that God uses people in your life to carve you? You ever wondered, why did God put somebody in my life that's that annoying, that I don't get along? God puts people in your life that build you into the person He needs you to be. And those people might not always be people you get along with. I learned something a long time ago and that's that I can learn something from everybody. One of the greatest, I studied this, I'm not getting into this tonight, but there is a generation that has a problem doubting their salvation. My pastor told me that wasn't really a thing before this generation. And he says the reason for it is that we don't teach doctrine in church anymore. We have little devotional, make you feel a little better messages, and they don't really teach doctrine. And a lot of churches don't preach a good, straight salvation message. And so it's a problem, and Christians doubt their salvation. And one of the greatest statements about that subject, I was in Hammond, Indiana at pastor school, and a gentleman was talking to me about this, and the subject had come up about doubting your salvation. And he said, you know, one of the things that I have observed is that lost people never doubt their salvation. And that was almost epiphanal for me. I thought, that's a brilliant statement. I'll give you another great statement that was made about that subject. And I heard a man say, there is a difference between doubt and unbelief. You're not lost. If you're lost because of your unbelief. You're not lost because of your doubt. Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. Tell me he didn't have some doubt, but he believed. See, I'm not saved because I don't doubt. I'm saved because I believe. If I'm lost, it's because I'm an unbeliever. The second statement I gave you was given to me by a PhD, had a PhD in theology. The first statement, the one about, I never met a lost man that doubted his salvation, that guy was a truck driver. I'm not faulting truck drivers, but they don't have PhDs in theology. I can learn something from anybody. I can learn something from a drunk on the street. If nothing else, it's like the old song, listen to the wisdom of a fool. If nothing else, he can tell me how he got into that mess. That young lady I mentioned today that died at age 32 because she had destroyed her life. 3 weeks before she died, she took her 10-year-old daughter and sat her down and said, I'm going to tell you the 13 steps that led me to where I am. And this life is, she told her, I'm going to die, and I'm going to die because of the life I've lived. And I'm going to tell you the steps that I took that got me here. And then I want you to promise me you won't make those steps. You won't take those steps. Interestingly enough, the first step was getting a job in high school. Interesting. Why? Because she automatically got in a crowd that was old enough to buy booze, but young enough to not care about their responsibilities. That's where it started. It all started, and then it went from there to the crowd. And it started with cigarettes, and then it went from cigarettes to booze, and then it went from there to pot, and it went from pot to heavy drugs and heavy alcohol, and the promiscuity just came along with it. Drunkenness and nakedness always go together. They just do. But I can learn something from anybody. So, okay, so I can learn something from anybody. What do I do with that information? Forbear one another. Put up with one another. Be patient with one another. Long suffering. That means putting up with a lot. That's what that word means. Suffering. The word suffer in the Bible, when Jesus said, suffer the children come unto me, he didn't mean he wanted the children to suffer. It means to allow them. He suffered them to come unto him. Long suffering, that means I allow a lot. I put up with a lot. And to be patient in love with putting up with one another. Forbearing one another, number 2. Number 3, admonishing one another. Admonishing one another. Colossians chapter 3, verse 16 says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another. Admonishing one another. You know what that is? That's giving each other a pep talk. Admonishing one another. That's urging people to do the right thing. That's not correcting one another. Correcting is me coming to you saying you're doing it wrong. Admonishing is, hey, keep going. You're doing okay. Keep going. You're doing all right. You're doing the right thing. I believe in you. You can do this. That's admonition. Bible says to bring up a child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Warning people to stay away from the wrong thing. Don't go that direction, man. That's gonna mess you up. That's admonition, admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Romans 15, verse 14 says, and I myself also am persuaded of you, my brethren, that ye also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another. We're supposed to forbear one another. We're supposed to admonish one another. We're supposed to comfort one another. 1 Thessalonians 4:18 says, wherefore comfort one another with these words. In context, he's talking about the return of the Lord. I don't think we talk enough about the return of the Lord. I don't think we speak about it. I don't think we think about it enough, that Jesus is coming back. And the more I look around, the more I want Jesus to come back, believe me. Looking up looks a whole lot better than looking around, because I've looked around and it don't look good. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, wherefore comfort yourselves together and edify one another. I'll talk about that one here in a minute. Wherefore comfort yourselves. We know what that means. But do we practice it? Do you look for people to comfort? Do you look for people to comfort them? To let them know you're there. You know, you don't have to have sweet words to comfort. You just have to be there. I think I told this story. Forgive me if I've told it too many times, but a little girl was late getting home from school. Mama said, where you been? She said, I was at Susie's house. I said, why? What were you doing over there? So I wanted you to come straight home. So, well, she was sitting on the porch crying because she had accidentally pulled the head off of her Barbie doll. She said, oh, you were, and she was sitting there crying on the porch because she her doll's head came off. Said, well, what, were you helping her put it back on? Said, no, I was just helping her cry. Sometimes we just have to help one another cry. That's comfort. That's comforting one another. Sometimes it's comforting just to know somebody's there. Somebody said that Job's friends did the best thing they could in the first chapter, because what they did in the first chapter was they sat there for 7 days with their mouth shut. They didn't say anything for 7 days. Number 5, receive one another. Receive one another. Romans 15, verse 7, wherefore receive ye one another as Christ also received us to the glory of God. Now, I want to be careful here. I heard a preacher one time say, come as you are, leave changed. Come as you are to our church. You're welcome to come as you are and leave changed. When it speaks of accepting one another, you think about it, Paul was in times of Romans. These people came out of diverse backgrounds. They came out of different family situations, and many of them had come out of lives that were very wretched, debauchery, idol worship. That's what they came out of. When people come into this church, you don't know what they're coming out of. And they need a church where they're accepted. I'm not saying that their sin should be accepted and affirmed. I saw there's a church over here in Davenport. They advertise themselves as being an affirming church. You know what that means? That means we accept sinful perverts, and you can stay a sinful pervert and still be here. Here's the thing. If I was going to be a heathen, why would I go to church? Why would I need church? I'd rather sleep in on Sunday or sit around, drink coffee, and listen to music. Why would I don't understand heathens that want a church that'll accept their heathenism. I mean, if I was a drunken whoremonger, I wouldn't look for a church that accepted drunken whoremongers. I just wouldn't go to church. But there's something inside of them that feels like they need that, and it's their word, not mine, affirmation. And I'm going to demand it of you. You will affirm me. You will accept me the way. No, I don't have to do that. No. Because the Bible condemns it. That being said, there's going to be people who are coming into this church who are coming out of the world. They're coming in their brokenness, and they're coming in their sin, and they want to be clean. They want to be right. They know that they're wrong. They know that their life needs to change. They need a place where it's safe to do that. They need a place where it's safe to be a sinner. I don't know who originally said it. I've heard it, but I've heard it in many renditions of it. But it's been said in many places in many ways. The church is not a showcase for spirituality. It is a hospital for sick saints. And every one of us have come. There's a whole lot of people in this church that have a past. And they might not be real proud of that past. And they want something better. And I'll tell you something, they will never get better unless they have a place where better is nurtured over the past. Because if we reject people that come in who have a past, now I'm not talking about accepting sin in the church. I'm going to live any way I want to. I'm going to go ahead and be a drunkard. I'm going to go ahead and be a sodomite, and you just have to accept me. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who come in here and they're struggling and they're battling with the horror, with the fallout of that sinful life that's destroying them, and they want to be delivered from it. They need a safe place to be delivered from that. Romans chapter 15, verse 7 says, wherefore receive ye one another as Christ also received us. When I think of the little dirt bag that I was when I got saved and when I got into church, You've heard me talk about my testimony. I'm going to say something. I went to church all the time, but I was a little dirtbag. Other than Sunday morning, I was an absolute little dirtbag. I'm telling you. I might have put on a pretty face on Sunday morning, but I'm going to tell you something. During the week, I was a heathen. And I knew it. That's a real hypocrite right there. But I was hungry. I wanted something different. I wanted it to be real. I wanted it to be right. I wanted to be right with God. And when I figured that out at 20 years old, because I'm dumb and it takes me a long time to figure things out, I wrestled with that thing for 10 years before I got saved. And can I tell you that when I walked into that church, I had a reputation. It wasn't all true, but enough of it was. I had a reputation. But there were enough people at that church that accepted me. It made all the difference in the world. Comfort one another, admonish one another, forbear one another, receive one another. Number 6, bear one another. That doesn't sound right. Well, I had to make it sound that way. Number 6, bear one another. Galatians chapter 6, verse number 2. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. How do I show you that I love you? I bear your burdens. Somebody says to me, preacher, I don't want to burden you. Well, I want you to burden me. That's what I'm here for. Matter of fact, that's what we're all here for. You've heard, I heard it said that a burden shared is divided. A joy that's shared is multiplied. And I want us to multiply our joys. I want to rejoice with you when you rejoice. I want to weep with you when you weep. Why? Because we're supposed to bear one another. Fulfill the law of Christ. What law? Well, he gave it to them earlier. He had given it to them earlier over in the last chapter, chapter number 5, when he said in chapter 5, verse number 14, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Take care of one another. So forbear one another, admonish one another, comfort one another, receive one another, bear one another, bear your burdens. Number 7, edify one another. The word edify means to build up. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 says in verse number 12, even so, ye, for as much as ye are zealous of spiritual gifts, seek that ye may excel to the edifying of the church. I'm not here to build me up. I'm here to build up the church. And if all of us come here to edify one another, to build one another up, to make one another better, to strengthen one another, that's what it means to edify. The word means to build up. You know what an edifice is? It's a wall. Something that's built. Edification is the building up of one another. We do that in our fellowship. You know, the truth of the matter is, one of the pluses to having these potlucks that we have occasionally, we don't have them all the time, but one of the things that it does is it gives y'all a chance to sit around with one another and yak. It gives you a chance to sit around and just talk to one another and just be with one another and fellowship with one another. And man, that builds you up. We build one another up. We get to go somewhere where everybody's glad that we're there. We get to be with a group of people who accept us and accept I want to be in a group of people that believe like I do and care like I do and think like I do, but they know that I'm faulty. They know that I'm frail. They know that I'm imperfect. But that's okay because we care about one another, and that builds everybody up. It's not about building up me. It's about building up the church. And by the way, the church that grows in that fashion will also grow in number. You'll see it happen. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26. How is it then, brethren, when ye come together, everyone hath a psalm, hath a doctrine, hath a tongue, hath a revelation, hath an interpretation. Let all things be done unto edifying. In other words, don't show up to make a show. He told the church at Corinth, everybody shows up. You've got a psalm, and you've got a prophecy, and you're going to speak in tongues, all this, and you've all got your own little show going on. When I came to Iowa, when I came to pastor All Seasons Baptist Church, one of the things, there's good people over there, and everybody was involved in a ministry. They had a bus ministry. Some people were doing bus ministry. Some people were doing RU. Some people were doing this, that, and the other. But there was absolutely no cohesion. Everybody showed up to do their little part. It didn't matter what went on in this other ministry over here. It doesn't matter what goes on in this, that, or the other. I've got a vision. I want to start I was talking to Chad about this. We want to start a veterans ministry. We want to start a veterans outreach. We want to do that. We want to get busy on that this year in the last part of the year. June's coming after Roundup Sunday. That's one of the pushes that I'm going to start working on. I want to start that. We have a Sunday school ministry over here for our children. We have kids ministry. And I want to build these ministries, and I have dreams about other ministries that I want to build. But listen, I don't want a Sunday school teacher that doesn't care about the veterans ministry. I don't want somebody in the veterans ministry that doesn't care about the Sunday school. No, I'm doing my own little thing over here. No, seek to excel to the edifying of the church. See? I've known professional musicians. I don't have any professional musicians. I know churches that pay their musicians. That'd be nice, man. That'd be a sweet gig. They just come in and they play and they leave. And somebody even suggested, you could probably, $100 a week, you could probably get somebody to come in here and play piano for it. I don't want that. I want somebody that it's a ministry to them. It's a ministry because they come to minister to the church. So you're not here to put on a show. If I was wanting to put on a show, I'd go down to Boosie's. They got a better sound system. I'm not here to put on a show. So how do you know Boosie's has a better sound system? I've been there on a police call. That's how I know. Actually, the drummer had a heart attack. That's how, and we showed up. That's how I know. And somebody in the back row says, "Hey, Pastor Cannon." No, I'm glad I'm wearing a badge right now. I was in uniform with a cop. So, but I don't want that. I'm not here to put up a show. Look, nobody is praying harder about a piano player than me because I don't want to be the Mark Cannon show up here. I'm not complaining. This is what I have to do right now. But man, I want somebody else up here doing the song leading. I want somebody else up here that's doing the piano that can do a better job, not get lost in the songs half the time. I want somebody that's good at it instead of me. Why? Because I want the edifying of the church. It's not about me. If it's all about me putting on a show, then we got a problem, and the church isn't edified. Bear one another's burdens, edify one another, prefer one another. Prefer one another. Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Be kindly affectionate one to another, with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. What does it mean to prefer one another? What does that mean? Well, I think of the word that jumps out to me is the word deference. And put it quite simply, Peter said, look not on the things of thyself, but look on the things of others. In other words, attending to the needs of others, letting other people have their way. Do you know it's better to give than to receive? Have you ever heard that before? It's more blessed to give than to receive. I'll tell you something else too. It's more blessed to give in than to win out. It's not important for me to get my way. Well, I can let that person. Well, it would be better if we did it my way. Yeah, but more people may be involved, and it'll help that person if we do it their way. It's not going to be the end of the world if it doesn't go as well as it could have gone, but, you know, let them do the job. They might not do as good a job as I might do, or they might not see it the same way I do, but this is a blessing to them to get to do that. You see, preferring one another. In other words, your feelings are more important than my feelings. Your needs are more important than my needs. Your desires more important than my desires. Paul told that to the Philippian church. He said, it's not my notes now, I can't quote it. Lost it. Just totally, the verse just went right out the door. I guess the Lord didn't want me to use that one. I got it. Let every man esteem other better than themselves. If I walk into a room and every person in that room is better than me in my eyes, and every person in that room has that same attitude, do you understand what that's going to do to the spirit of the room? If I treat you like you're more important than I am, and you treat everybody else like they're more important than you are, preferring one another in brotherly love. The word is Philadelphia. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is the city of brotherly love, one of the most violent cities in America now. If there was ever a city that could change their name, it's Philadelphia, because it is overrun with crime. A city of brotherly love. Brotherly kindness. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. There's one more, and I'm going to cover that next week. Love one another. So doesn't this all sound like love one another? It does. But I'm going to say more about that next week. Let's all stand. With heads bowed and eyes closed, say, preacher, God's spoken.